The ORICO Transparent M.2 Enclosure is a great product. It can support SATA and NVMe, but I only have a NVMe SSD, so I couldn't test the part of SATA. Unfortunately, maybe my machine is a laptop, so when the testing, I couldn't use all the performance. Look at the picture. I used a 2230 SSD, SK Hynix BC501. When I try to copy a large document, its speed can keep in 335 megabytes every second. I use this item to connect to my phone. It can work. However, if you want to use the OTG, you need to make sure your SSD file system is exFAT. This is an excellent product for the price. I have read comments that the plastic was cheap or too thin. You are not supposed to drive over it or hit it with a hammer, it is just fine. Anyone who is tech savvy has enough common sense to fit, test and observe the performance and then decide if any modifications need to be done. I too noticed the drive got warm, not hot, just warm. I peeled the sticker off my M.2 drive, a Samsung 970 EVO, and attached it to the outside bottom of the case. I placed the supplied thermal pads on over the chip CPU and one split between the two memory chips. I then added a little thermal paste to the thermal pads provided and closed the case. It worked fine before and it works fine now. I just did this as an extra insurance for thermal transmission, and yes, it does get warm, but it works great for a $33 enclosure for a drive I had in the original packaging for almost 8 months trying to decide if I wanted to use it or sell it. Follow their instructions, and if that is not clear, go to their YouTube channel or pick anyone showing how this drive is assembled and how it works best. This is, by far, the sleekest and easiest to use enclosure for an M.2 SATA drive I've ever used. I've personally been a big fan of ORICO's designs, partly because they give me that 90s Game Boy Color satisfaction of being able to see the inner workings of what I'm using. Some of that is lost on these with the integrated heatsink, but it's hard to fault ORICO for not wanting to overheat your SSD, as even SATA ones like this supports can run a bit hot. Setup couldn't be simpler. Remove the heatsink cover, remove the PCB from the enclosure, slot your SSD onto the PCBs. Once you've done that, slot the PCB back into the enclosure, USB in first, snap in the standoff to the other end, then put the cover back on. Thermal pads are included to help dissipate heat and can be added to the SSD's heat spreading sticker or the underside of the heatsink. The enclosure is a little tough to open, but as long as you don't swap the SSD inside too much, that's likely not an issue. I've tested 3 SSDs with this enclosure, a Crucial MX300 275GB, a WD Blue 500GB, and a Micron 5100 Eco 960GB. All 3, including the double-sided 5100 Eco, work elegantly as long as they're installed correctly. I won't bore you with performance figures. It functions about as you'd expect an SSD to perform for USB 3.5 gigabits per second performance. The USB interface does bottleneck the SSD sequential performance. Click link in description for more reviews.